Hey friends, Alvin here. Welcome to our monthly Zoom meeting. This is for May. And I am pleased to introduce Jared Mortley, who is the high school campus minister with Inter Varsity Christian Fellowship. He and his wife and their two kids, fun with two kids, living in Toronto. And we are glad to have him here as he's sharing about this whole idea of, well, how do you tell your story, especially to your board? And so, Jared, welcome.
Thanks, Alvin. Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm going to share this with you guys. And like Alvin said, so I work for Inter Varsity Christian Fellowship, and I'm a high school campus minister. So I mostly work with high schools directly in their schools, and it's a great job. I mean, obviously, right now I'm on Zoom a lot like this throughout the weeks, meeting with people. But part of my work is that I actually fully fundraise my salary from donors and from ministry partners. So I was chatting with Alvin about how could I maybe help out? And I realized, I spent a lot of time sharing stories with donors and supporters. Sometimes I write a monthly update. It's a little much sometimes, so I've been doing more of a quarterly one lately. But I've been doing this ministry model for about 8 years now. And so hopefully I can give you guys some helpful tips on how to share stories and get people, to be excited about what's going on and invested. And so here we go. So the first thing that I would give you guys for a tip is when you're thinking about your story, it actually starts before that with having a clear vision and some goals. And this is an example of the vision of Inter Varsity. And so it's, being shaped by God's word, led by the Holy Spirit. The purpose of Inter Varsity Christian Fellowship of Canada is the transformation of youth and students who I get to work with, and then graduates in all their ethnic diversity into fully committed followers of Jesus Christ. So when you're starting to think about your story, it's kind of important to have some of these goals and this vision set up so that you can think of stories that fit into what you're trying to achieve. I wrote on here some of my goals for this past year was having 4 to 5 students helping to lead some of our meetings and helping to lead Bible studies. And then another goal was having every student being mentored by a staff member. So then I can share a story that kind of tells people about that when it's time to do that. So one of the ways that I do this, or I should say real quick, is that when you're thinking about the vision, it's thinking about why do you do what you do? Like it says in this one here, it says the purpose of Inter Varsity, right? And then you'll have a story that kind of fills that in, because there's going to be different expectations from people on your board, right? Some people are thinking about numbers. Some people are thinking about lives change. Some people are thinking about, well, how many, programs are you running or having volunteers involved? And hopefully you can tell stories that share some of those details. So the next tip I'd give you is to start getting in the habit of recording stories throughout the year of students learning and growing and encountering God, like I said, that fit the vision that you have. So an example that I give you is of one of my students. His name is Mark. He's in grade 11. He's Filipino. And I'd include that because part of my vision was to have students in all their ethnic diversity, in leadership around me, not just more white guys like myself, but have other people as part of our vision leading. And so Mark is in grade 11. And when the pandemic hit, he realized that his faith was mostly performative and that he was going to church for the community. And because he was popular there, he liked getting responsibilities. It made him feel good about himself, but he realized that he was not really living with integrity and following Jesus. So he started coming out to our weekly meetings, and I've been seeing him grow and change a lot. And he's been he actually decided to recommit his life to Jesus, because in his words, he said that he realized he wasn't actually following Jesus. And so I've seen his character change and grow. He's become more humble. He's been seeking out accountability for other things. He's started to use his Instagram to evangelize to his friends. He's started to help lead weekly discussions and Bible studies, right? So when I share a short story like that, it talks about, it hits some of those vision pieces that I've got and some of those goals, right? And so I wrote that down actually and first shared it in, I think that I first shared that story with some people in January. So I wrote it down and then I start to get in that habit and I'll have some of those stories to share with people. And I could talk about how, there's 20 something people coming out to different meetings and we're running these kinds of meetings, and those things are important, but it's also good to be able to go deeper in with a story of one person and how they're being affected and their life is being transformed. So another tip I'd give you is kind of more of a variation on a theme here, is get your leaders. First of all, have some leaders. I know it might seem kind of obvious. Hopefully though, you guys have leaders around you helping you. We can't be doing this all on our own. So I just encourage you in that. And then encourage them to be writing down stories. They're connecting with students in ways that you aren't, and encourage them to start writing those things down. And, they'll have a different view on what events went well, or, on somebody, like I said, lives being transformed. So then gather those things up when it's time to write your report, or maybe even ahead of that time, right? So if you're talking with people, you can share those things. And then the next tip, again, kind of a variation on a theme here, is get the students, when you hear these stories from your leaders, get the story straight from your students if you can, for two reasons. First, it's more meaningful to hear it straight from students, right? To hear about this specific thing that happened, for why they decided that they needed to make this change, or how God impacted their life. It's going to be more meaningful when somebody else hears it straight from them. And then the other thing is that it teaches students to start to pay attention to how God's at work in their life, right? And then they're going to grow in sharing that, because we might have that habit naturally, but sometimes when we talk with students, you think, oh, they're growing. And then you talk with them and they don't even notice that it's happening. And they might forget a year from now. But, if you sit down with them, or have a leader sit down with them and think through that story, that'll be helpful for them just in their discipleship. And then it's a little bit of a side, but hopefully having your leaders and your students do that will start to develop a culture where people are just paying attention to how God's at work in the ministry, right? So the last tip that I'd give you is to not just write out, what's going well, but to write out things that people could be praying for, and to invite the congregation to be praying for your students throughout the year. Something that I've been doing with the high school ministry is gathering any teachers or students or parents or, supporters to come and pray. We did 4 this year. And so we were able to say, but here's the things that are going well, but here's the ways that you could be praying for us and helping this to go better, and they get more invested in what's happening in the lives of students. I'm sure you guys know lots of people who would love to have more time to come and volunteer with the youth, but they could pray, right? So I also find that it helps me to fight the temptation when I'm writing out what's been going on, to say, oh, everything's good, we've got no problems kind of thing, or we're meeting all our goals. But instead I can say, here's a place where we want to see God work more, or here's a need that we have. And it creates a space, like I said, for the congregation to get invested. And then when you go and you write your report, you can look back and actually write down, and here's how we saw prayers answered. And when I shared with you in January, by June, we saw this change, and that was amazing. So, so those are my 5 tips for you guys. But I've gotten pretty well into the habit of doing this. And when I sit down to write an update, I find it a lot easier. And I know that I can share things, from the program side of things. I can say we ran Youth Alpha and there's this many people coming. But it's also great to have a few stories where I can say, and this is how we saw some lives changed and students meet Jesus in this deeper way. So I've actually also started to find that as I do this, I'll be writing a report and I end up stopping in the middle and just kind of like worshiping because I see God's been faithful, right? Throughout the whole year, I've been making this habit of thinking about how God is at work in the ministry. And my hope is that, when you share a report with your board or with your congregation, or when I share stories with my supporters, it would do the same thing, right? That they would see that God is faithful, that he's good, that he's at work, and that his kingdom is growing. So that's what I got to share with you guys, and hopefully these tips are helpful. And as you write reports to your boards and stuff, I'm praying for you, and I'm glad that I could share this with you. So I'm going to pass it back to Alvin.
Well, thanks, Jared, for your insights and for the tips. Those 5 tips, those are very helpful. And so, friends, we have one more monthly Zoom left for this season. And so that's happening on Monday, June the 14th. We have Dan Pike, who's the Director of Youth and Family Ministries with the Canadian Baptist Atlantic Canada, joining us on that day, looking at what does service projects look like now in youth ministry, especially during this pandemic. And so we look forward to seeing you there then. In the meantime, blessings to you.